muted. It's just so that Andrew can get in.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for the Hooper Mosca listening session. I'm Willa Williford, and I've been working with Don Malgaris at the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition on the Valley-wide housing needs assessment and community assessments for a number of communities all around the Valley. And today we're talking about a draft plan and seeking feedback from members of the community to make improvements and refinements to that plan or to that assessment. So I'll let Dawn introduce herself and then we'll get into the agenda.
Hi, I am Dawn Malgaris. I am the director of the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition. We're an affordable housing nonprofit in Alamosa, working in all 6 counties of the Valley. And we commissioned this study so we can decide and figure out how we help each of these communities find solutions to their individualized housing needs. So your feedback will help us determine how do we help you with financing, site location, or rehab or other programs that your community might need.
Super. So our agenda for today, we're going to start with, sorry. Okay, we're going to review key findings of the 2021 needs assessment, share some specific metrics to Hooper and Mosca, and then we don't have anyone joining us on the Zoom call today, so we'll just share with you the questions that we have in the hopes that you can provide feedback in some other forum, be it written or a call to Dawn. So normally we would start with introductions of everyone on the call at this point, but we'll just move into the overview of the needs assessment. So the assessment was covered the full Valley, the 6 county area, and looked at a lot of the macro trends as well as the county level data. Now, as we're moving into this community specific work, we're looking at individual towns, or in some cases groupings of 2, such as the Hooper and Mosca. And those really drill down to what is unique about these communities and what specific actions might be appropriate there to address housing needs, because there's so much variation across the Valley. So the key findings that we'll talk about are going to mostly focus on this Valley-wide needs assessment, but I also wanted to mention the Alamosa housing needs assessment because that was conducted about the same time. It was published in January of 2021, and it is available on the City of Alamosa's website. And because we're in Alamosa County, for these particular communities, some of the data is drawn from that study as well. So and just to mention, the Valley-wide study is available at the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition's website. So the big picture trends of sort of why is there a housing problem distilled down to these 8 puzzle pieces. So as everyone has observed, both anecdotally and in the data, home prices are up significantly, both to rent and to own. And the last study was conducted in 2009, and prices have been chunking up pretty quickly. And I think in recent years, that curve has gotten even steeper. So at the same time, labor and materials for construction have increased. So the price point at which housing can be delivered profitably has gone up, and the private market is not able to respond to this housing shortage on its own. So really public-private partnerships are typically needed to address these gaps. As housing prices go up and people have higher housing payments, we use a term in the housing world, cost burdened. So then people are stressed and strained because they don't have the money for other things and that are just needed for day-to-day living. So that is very prevalent. Almost half of renters and about a quarter of owners are in this situation of being stressed by their housing payments. It's also creating this dynamic of forced commuting. So if you can't find a home in one community, you're ending up living in another community, and it might be quite a ways from your job. And that has a lot of cost to it. In some cases, as much cost per month as your housing payment. And that's a little bit of, can be a hidden cost, but it adds up pretty quickly. We also observed in the research this dynamic of residential sprawl. So most of new permits are being pulled for unincorporated areas rather than in the cities and towns. And this over the long haul is really, it's really inefficient and expensive as people need to drive more, utilities are harder, a lot of the services that local government provide are harder to provide in these very dispersed, unincorporated areas. When we looked at just the inventory, what's the mix of existing housing resources, choices are pretty limited. People don't necessarily have the variety of housing that they might like in sort of the arc of their lifetime. So, you know, something to rent while you're in school or taking your first job, inexpensive housing that might be like a duplex or a townhouse as your first home to purchase. And then also places for people to downsize and age in place for seniors. So, you know, most very much heavily dominated by single family homes housing inventory. Then, you know, as the dynamics of the demographics where people are a lot high increase in people over 65 is creating an imbalance between workers and workforce housing, putting additional pressures on ability to recruit and retain employees. So then, you know, this labor shortage is then tied back to our increasing prices, and we kind of go round and round. So that all is kind of underlying the dynamics that we'll talk about specific to your communities. So one more piece of research that I'd like to highlight is that we interviewed and surveyed employers extensively. And when we asked the question, do you feel that the availability of housing that is affordable to your employees, what kind of level of problem is it? The vast majority of employers felt it is a moderate, serious, or most critical problem. So very few employers are not touched by the housing problem. Kind of one of the bottom line pieces of our research was to quantify how many housing units are needed if we look out 5 years. And through looking at, you know, what would create a functional rental market, stabilize the homeownership market, what's happening with retiring employees who plan to stay in the Valley, and then have, you know, as they leave their jobs, new people will need to come in, and job growth. We came up with this number of 1,885, which is a big number, but it is, you know, recognize that it is sort of the top level need, and that we expect communities will respond with a lot of creative solutions, but that they won't necessarily set their goals at 100% of this. We took this 1,885 can be distributed across the Valley in a lot of different ways, but we took a look at two different approaches here. One is by job location in yellow, and the other is by household location in green. And so Alamosa County has by far the largest share as the economic hub and the home of the most jobs and the most households. But that doesn't necessarily translate into tremendous need in Hooper and Mosca. I wanted to introduce our housing bridge. Our housing funders use the term and the metric area median income a lot, and that's represented here as AMI. And this just graphically depicts kind of different segments of the housing market, what a two-person household might be making, and sort of what type of housing they might be able to afford. And obviously there's a lot of variety here, but we just want to create a simple graphic to describe some of those things. And we're seeing the greatest need below 120% AMI, with a little bit of need in that green market rate housing, but much more emphasis on the missing middle and the below 80%. So our 5 recommendations out of the Valley-wide assessment are that economic development and housing go hand in hand. We don't want, if you put all your chips in one or the other, it's not gonna produce a good outcome. But if those are sort of coordinated in a lockstep manner, then there's a lot of synergy between more housing, more jobs, and people thriving in your community. More housing is needed across a spectrum of housing prices, types and prices. This is to that piece about the lack of variety and the lack of opportunity for people at different life phases. We recognize that it's one valley with many very unique communities. So we want things to both be changed to be considered in a regional context, but also very specific to what's happening in that specific town. And so that's where we hope the feedback from today's presentation will help us make sure we're getting it right for Hooper and Mosta. We also recommend we start small and build on promising practices. Your communities have not seen new housing in a long time, and so you need to prove up those markets and then sort of start to get traction and be able to shift course without having taken a lot of risk or expended a lot of money. We also recommend thinking about housing with equity, diversity, and inclusion in mind. When we're making our regulations or investing our local dollars or dollars from state or federal sources, we want to make sure that we're creating a lot of opportunity for everyone in the community, not creating segregation or winners and losers. So just to get into the key metrics, let's talk about, that's out of order. Let's keep going. Let's talk about this little dashboard. So, we just took a look at some of the snapshot characteristics, and population here is quite small, and this population is actually only representative of Hooper. So we'll update the study to include both towns. Kind of an even split between site-built and mobile homes, and then a small portion of homes that are multifamily. We monitored your market for 6 months, and we were unable to find any homes for sale or for rent. So, that really indicating that any transactions that are occurring are through word of mouth, and partly that's a small, tightly knit community, but also just indicating that there's very, very little vacancy or need for marketing. So we can keep going. This is a detailed slide, and I invite you to take a close look at it if you've been able to download it from Dawn's website. But it is where we look at in greater detail what area median income sort of bands are there, what can households afford, and where is the greatest need. And so we're recommending these price points of under $125,000 for home ownership and under about $700 per month for rent. We also, based on the number of households in the area, we think about 6 to 8 homes would be the need here. But we really want to focus and recommend focusing on bringing back abandoned or dilapidated homes over building new as a starting point. The other thing I would say here is that these communities might be able to support more housing development if we're really consciously trying to make a policy shift from building in the unincorporated areas to in town, closer to water and sewer and all the services. A few potential goals and actions that we want to highlight and get your feedback if we're on the right track or if we should consider different direction. But this acquisition, renovation of rundown and abandoned homes is the primary recommendation. We also think that expanding the use of the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition's home rehab and the Energy Resource Center's energy retrofits could really help make people's homes more comfortable, affordable, and safe. And that would be, those programs are underutilized currently in these communities. And then another thing that we'd recommend looking at is creating and publishing a municipal code to give the rules of the road to anyone looking to update their homes, or update or build new, that is. And to, in the process of doing that, to look at adjusting zoning to support a wider variety of homes. So appreciating that Moscow is zoned rural, and that Hooper's land use code has been a series of ordinances over time that aren't sort of a cohesive municipal code. So I'd like to pause here to just ask, have we gotten things right? Are we on the right track? Is there anything you feel like is missing or could make this document more helpful to you? I would also love to get a local contact, because as we publish these, it would be nice for that to be more transparent, who to connect to there. Dawn is always available as a contact as well, and she is listed on the final page of the report, but it would be nice to have both. So that concludes the community overview, but I'd like to just highlight for you a few of the questions that we would typically do in the listening session. So we begin with goals and just ask participants to weigh in with, what does success look like for you? Like, if you're putting yourself out there 5-10 years, what's changed in your community and what has made it better? How much of the need do you feel like we should address? Are the numbers about right, or should we go for a higher or lower number? And then what kinds of housing do you feel like the highest priorities? Should we focus on seniors, families, rental, ownership? What within the sort of data that we've provided would be where you'd want to put emphasis? We also wanted to talk about land and partnerships. So as I mentioned in the beginning, really no housing solutions are moving forward right now that are not public-private partnerships. And so is there, town, county, school-owned land that would be appropriate in your community? And who are the experts? And are they at the table? Are there people with with experience in the trades or development, design, finance? Who's there and who's not? How do we and how would we bring them to the community so we have the right people? And then lastly, how do we better utilize existing programs? So I'll ask Dawn to speak to that a little bit, and then we'll wrap up.
So there are several programs in the area, like Willa mentioned, the Housing Coalition's Home Rehab Program, Down Payment Assistance Program, the Energy Resource Center Weatherization, and they have a solar program and several others as well that we are really struggling to get outside of some of the larger cities like Alamosa, Monte Vista, and Center. We'd like to know, what does it take to get these programs in your area? Have the community members tried to get these programs and had difficulties, so that maybe the organizations can change policy, or we can reach out to our funders about changing policy that would make the program easier to access and remove barriers? And are there programs that your community needs that you are just not aware of, or that have not been in existence yet? And can we help bring those programs about somehow? So we would love to hear more from you about things like weatherization, home rehab, urban renewal programs, and the ability to buy and rehab dilapidated homes, new construction, and just what you feel your community needs and how these programs can be helping your community members. We want them to be evenly distributed, if possible, around the valley. And right now that's not happening. So how can we help with that?
Thank you. I think there was one thing we heard from another community in our tour this morning, was that there was a reputation that there was a many years wait list. And it, that may have been the case several years ago, but at this point there are the funding and the resources in some of these things. And so just overcoming that old news, so to speak. So our final, just to wrap up, We are on the road listening in many communities as sort of the second part of this tour. We already were in Saguache and Mineral and Rio Grande County earlier in the month, and our program over the next couple of days is the communities listed here. So we're asking that you bring your feedback to Dawn by July 23rd, and we'll incorporate those new changes and finalize these documents in early August. And then after that, we'll move into action plan and implementation. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.